What up, what up, what up? Yo, hope everybody is having a great start to their week. It is a little cool down here in Atlanta, so had to throw on the cap and the sweater. But today I wanted to start out with a conversation, right? Just remember that this is a conversation. It is not a lecture unless you guys don't have any questions, in which case I got something to talk about. And that this is for the guys who have their style game at a relatively knowledgeable level and you want to really elevate it. I would say this is, the college element of style after you've learned the elementary concepts of style, not diminishing anybody else's experience, but this is where some of the fly guys come to elevate their style. So with that being said, I wanted to have a conversation about the importance of knowing your body, right? Pause. Pause. So I already know some guys will be like, it's a little reckless right there. But the importance of knowing your body is the next step beyond just knowing your size. Pause. That sounds crazy too. So there is a conversation that a lot of guys have around fit. You hear all the time that guys are saying that fit is king, and that's incomplete. It's incomplete because fit is actually a part of a trifecta. Sorry, guys. What has been going on with my? Well, I'll tell you, you get stuff and then it stops working on you. But it goes to a conversation when we speak to the real essence and understanding of what your body actually represents. Now, the first thing that a lot of guys miss is the understanding of your physique. One, nobody's going to have a perfectly symmetrical look. The guys who have a very symmetrical look, these are often the fit models. These are the guys that we see wearing clothes. They may actually be models on the runway or any of those different types of things, but they don't even have a fully symmetrical body. It's just more symmetrical than most. So if they don't have a perfectly symmetrical body, you probably don't. And that's okay. That's a great thing actually, because then you have an understanding that you're not supposed to have perfection. But you'll find that when you are wearing clothing, especially tailored clothing, you have the opportunity to mask a lot of these different elements. And so in my last YouTube video, I talked about understanding these different components of your body. We're going to do a kind of an overview or review of that concept. And that is really understanding your proportions, your pitch, and your and your scale essentially, right? I'm going to try to find another alliteration with the P, but it's oftentimes your posture, your pitch, and then understanding the scale of your body. So a lot of guys don't think about the fact that their body does weird things, and this may come from early on. You broke some part of your body. You broke a leg, you broke a foot, you broke a collar, your collarbone. You may have broken a shoulder. You may have broken your arm, and this will affect how your body is, right? That's when stuff starts to become asymmetrical. Or maybe you played a sport. You played basketball, you played football, and you were a quarterback. You played baseball, and you were a pitcher or a left fielder, right fielder, what have you. And your dominant hand was the thing that you were throwing the ball with, shooting the ball with, right? In those spaces. Well, if that's the case, then you're going to find that that muscle on your shoulder is probably more developed. You probably have utilized that muscle much more, so that may drop your arm, right? All these different types of things may affect how your body is positioned. Or maybe you've sat at a computer for the last 5 to 6 years, especially through the pandemic and working from home, and you found that your posture went from straight up to now much more slow. An interesting thing happens when you do that. It's not just that your shoulders are back, right? You have a chest that pushes forward. Your back muscles also begin to constrict, and so that muscle is working, and you find that your neck goes back. If you begin to slouch over a computer, not only does your chest begin to concave and your shoulders drop, but your back widens. So a lot of these things guys are not paying attention to, and unfortunately, a lot of clothiers or uh, image consultants are not following these elements as well and paying attention to the body of their client to figure out what they need to pay attention to. So even before we put on clothes that people can take home, one of the things that a quasi mentor has taught to me about was really feeling the body, right? And then you start to feel how a shoulder may pitch. You start to feel how the back may sway or a hollow back may be. And in these spaces, you start to recognize that there are things that we can adjust and or manipulate to create a better version of presentation than just having a suit that quote unquote fits. And this is something that a lot of guys will miss because either they haven't been doing image consulting, tailoring, or fitting long enough, or because they are not paying attention to details. It's usually one of the two. Because the best fitters are usually going to be in the bespoke space. They are going to pay attention to all of these different elements and utilize them so that we can offset them. So we'll talk briefly about how you can adjust some of these. Some of these are going to require more in-depth conversations, and we can definitely do that. If you have any questions, by all means, put it in the chat, and I will happily answer it. Especially when it comes to fit, I know a lot of guys tend to have questions about this. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is having an understanding of your proportions, right? So a lot of times when we're talking about proportions, guys miss that proportions are going to be vertical and they're also going to be horizontal or lateral. And the proportions that we want to think about when it comes to the vertical is your torso to leg ratio. Now, again, when we start to think about these elements, we may have proportionally a shorter torso, but it may look even shorter because our shoulders are sloping. Or maybe we are stooped. So if I turn to the side, I'm sitting like this. So now my head goes forward, the jacket is probably going to go back, and it's not going to fit properly if I'm wearing a jacket. So when we're paying attention to these things, then that is going to affect how long our body looks. If I'm standing straight up, my torso is going to look a little bit longer, right? But if I'm stooped forward, my body is now curving, and so I'm looking shorter than I actually am. This happens for a lot of my older clients. So guys who are usually over the age of 65, they still need some clothing. They're coming in, they start to have hunchback, right? They start to stoop forward because they are usually not working out. They're not necessarily taking care of themselves the same way that they used to when they were younger. And by nature, you're going to see the body begin to shrink. So this is why you may see somebody who was once 6'5" now look like they're 6'3", not because they've necessarily lost the height, but they've lost the ability to stand in an erect posture. So we have to pay attention to that. When it comes to our leg line, whether you stand with your knees locked, right, like Michael Jordan used to, when he was uh, when he was bent over, he would lock his knees back, right, so that they set back right here. Then that is going to change how your leg line looks. And the other thing that's interesting here is that your leg line proportionally can be extremely short, even though you may have a long torso. I had a client; he was 6'5", 6'5". His fiance, I believe, was 5'2". I think his fiance was like 5'2", maybe 5'3", and they had the exact same leg line, right? When I took her out seam, we were just doing it for giggles, right? I took her out seam and I took his out seam, and they were like a half inch, maybe an inch apart. And so she had very long legs. He had a very long torso. If you ever have paid attention or looked and seen Michael Phelps has an extremely long torso and short legs. And he also has the broader shoulders that kind of begin to slope down because of him swimming. So paying attention to these elements is going to help you with your overall look. So let's say you have a short torso and a longer leg line. I do. Then you want to pay attention to having a longer jacket. You also want to pay attention to having longer pieces. So even sweaters for me are benefited if they have a longer hemline. So if the bottom of the sweater is longer, it gives me a longer torso when I'm layering pieces. So you want to pay attention to those things. If you have a longer torso, then you want to utilize having pants that have a longer rise or that they sit higher on the waist to cut the body off. And so I talk about this in the previous video that I just shot so that you can get a better breakdown. And I also offer a formula for how to determine your leg to or your torso to leg ratio, as well as your shoulder to hip ratio, which we're going to talk about right now. So a lot of times with guys, they think that they're supposed to have these big broad shoulders, and that if you have big broad shoulders, that they are going to look set up, right? Well, in reality, you can still have broad shoulders. I have relatively broad shoulders, but they slope, right? So my shoulders do this, and somebody else's shoulders may be erect. They may be straight across, right? And so when you're thinking about these terms of your shoulder line, how your shoulders sit, you want to pay intention and pay attention to those elements. Then you also want to think about your waist and hip, because a lot of guys don't think about their hips, which is actually where you should be measuring your pants. They only think about their waist. So let's briefly talk about your waist and your hips, because this is an important conversation. I didn't really talk about in the video, but I did give some elements too. And if you have any questions, by all means, let me know. You can put them in the comments, and I will address them as soon as they come up, as long as I'm not in the stream of consciousness. So what I found is that a lot of guys, first and foremost, especially the older guys or guys who are a little bit more abundant in the midsection, they are not having their waist measurement measured properly. They're measuring under the belly instead of around the actual belly. And I get it. There are guys who don't want to hear the truth about what their waistline actually looks like. And with vanity sizing and with lower rises now, when it comes to the pant, they are like, listen, I'm a 34. Clearly, they are a 40, right? But they're wearing it under their abundance. And so they're like, no, I'm a 34, right? And what they don't realize is that that cuts off their body. It can make their body look disproportionate, and it can make their posture as well as their presence look diminished because they're not wearing their pants properly. And this is not necessarily something that guys are doing because they are unaware of it. It's because they're ignorant to it. And I like that to use the word ignorant, because I learned probably about 2 years ago that ignorant does not mean you are absent of the knowledge. It simply means that you're choosing to ignore the information that's in front of you, right? So that's what it really means for you to ignore something. And so there's a lot of guys who know they are not a 34, right? I have somebody who knows clothing, and he still wears his pants. He chooses to wear his pants under his belly because he does not want to acknowledge how wide that midsection is. But we know that if you actually take care of that longer rise and wear your pants at their natural waist, which is going to be at the midsection, at the belly, you're going to have a more comfortable pant. You're going to feel more comfortable when you sit down, and it's going to be more aesthetically pleasing to the eye, your eye, and the eyes of others. And so we pay attention to that. We also have to pay attention to the seat. Now, I've seen this too many times to not address it. Most guys are coming in and they are measuring the waist, and then they're trying to build a pant off of that, right? They're not paying attention to the seat to waist ratio to then determine what is going to look best. The tailor or a factory is going to make a pant based off of the seat measurement. They're going to go down the leg or the rest of the leg line based off of the way that the seat is measured. So a lot of guys will pay more attention to the waist measurement, and then some will bypass the seat measurement, and they wonder why pants look or feel tight, or the client or customer or yourself, you wonder why the pant feels so tight. It's because you're not adjusting for the seat measurement. You're just paying attention to your waist. And bear in mind that a tailor can always adjust the waist measurement. They have a very difficult time adjusting the seat or the rise of the pant because there's not a lot of fabric left in that area in order to release and give you more space, right? So you want to pay attention and intention to those elements. And then after that, you can begin to create a fuller leg line that will look more balanced when you're looking at your overall ensemble. So the other aspect as I move up, because that pant is very, very important, is the shoulder line. And the shoulder line is important, but it is a little bit more nuanced than the average person is going to talk about. And that's because it's not just about the slope. And I just had this come to front of mind, so I apologize that I didn't speak about it in the beginning. They just pay attention to the slope or whether it is erect. They don't pay attention to deltoids. They don't pay attention to how the points of the shoulders may adjust. So you could have somebody who has forward pointing shoulders. That is essentially going to be, let me turn this way. That is essentially going to be where somebody's shoulders do this. Now, it's not really necessarily noticeable if I am standing right in front of you. I could be like this, and you'll see it slightly in the chest area, but it's not super noticeable. It's not till you turn here that you notice this. Now, if I have on a shirt, if I'm wearing a jacket of a suit, then you start to really see the gathering here. And a lot of guys will say, oh, the chest is too full, when that's not. It's actually the forward points on the shoulder that you're paying attention to. If you're a guy who works on pull ups or chin ups in that space, you may find that you have to adjust for a lower or a higher shoulder line. So you may have to actually add padding, not because you have extremely sloping shoulders, but because if not, you're going to have a bulge on the shoulders, on the delts, that are going to make the suit look like they didn't know what they were doing. They were making it. I have a question that says, Sexy Jans asks, so should the waist be measured at the hip? That is actually a common question. No, you want to measure at the natural waist. So I always say measure at the belly button. Usually you can tell where the natural waist is if you were to touch the back of somebody's back, right? And then put your hand in front of their belly button, then you can see that's kind of where the natural waist is going to be. And you'll notice that it may be slightly higher, it may be slightly lower, just depending on where you are or what the way that the torso is set up. Again, the body is not perfect, right? So that's what we're paying attention to. And so when we're thinking about the shoulder line, we have to pay attention to all these elements because this is going to affect the pitch of the sleeve. So it's not just the proportions, it's also the pitch. Pitch is going to happen in two places. It's going to first happen in the sleeve, but it's also going to happen in the waistline. So if we're talking about your sleeve, have you ever noticed that there's all this excess fabric when you put on a suit jacket? There'll be all this fabric back here that is suede, right? There is, it looks like the fabric is making a striation, right? Well, if you're seeing that, that usually means that your shoulder needs to be, or your sleeve, I'm sorry, needs to be adjusted because it's pitching backwards. And if you see it in the front, um, I'm sorry, if you see it in the back, it's pitching back and it needs to be adjusted forward. If you're seeing it in the front, then that means it's pitching forward and it needs to be adjusted going back. And you'll notice that when you see a sleeve that sits straight, how much better it looks on the garment. Now, a qualitative tailor can adjust the sleeve. It's expensive. This is why I'm always advising guys not to buy cheap shit, not just because it will fall apart on you, but also you don't want to make the investment to make sure that it looks its best. So you can adjust that sleeve. And when you rotate that sleeve, not only does it look better, it actually makes for better movement when you are moving throughout the day, when you're reaching for something, when you are driving, even though you shouldn't be driving in your suit jacket. Please don't drive in your suit jacket, right? It will look better when you are reaching to shake somebody's hand, right? There's all these other elements that will create a better experience for yourself and for others. The next thing that a lot of guys don't think about is the pitch of their pelvis. So I tend to be what's called a fence pisser. This happened at the last space that I was collaborating with, and was I was put up on game that fence pisser is a person who leads with their pelvis. So I tend to lean back. My shoulders tend to lean back, and I lead with my stomach. And so when I was talking to one of the gentlemen there, he was like, "Yeah, when I was first starting, we had a client like that, and the fitter was like, yeah, fence pisser to mark it down as fence pisser, and the wife of the husband or the client said, "What was that? Like, what did you just say?" And they were like, "Oh, it's French, right?" So from now on, I've been like, "It's a fence pisse," and they'd be like, "What?" It's French. Don't worry about it. But that essentially means that you are leading with your midsection. Now, this doesn't really have anything to do with your weight or your size. It's just kind of dealing more with your stance. I tend to make my back go to hyperextend my back, as my wife would say. So my shoulders go back and my stomach comes out. Now, if I have a little bit of weight right now in the midsection, a little abundance, and I do, then it becomes much more pronounced because now you have this little, this little piece of, it's not that big, but you have a little piece of a belly that's pushing out. So in these cases, you want to offset that by paying attention to your gorge, which is the piece that the lapel and the collar will meet, where the lapel and collar will meet. You want to make sure that that placement is going to balance out the rest of the torso, especially if it's pronounced, right? If when I flatten this out, it's going to lay different. I also want to pay attention to the way the lapel rolls. I want to pay attention to the button placement because all of these things are now going to affect the overall image of the garment. So some of my first pieces that I had, the button placement set way too high. Apologize for that sound. The button placement set way too high, and so it looks like I was having a baby, like I was in my first trimester, right? Because I had put the button placement probably about 2 inches above my natural waistline. And so you'll see this a lot of times with made to measure, especially if guys don't really know what they're doing. They're just putting in that button placement because that's what they think they're supposed to do. And they haven't properly measured the shoulder to the first button. They haven't paid attention to the length of the jacket. And they don't know that in a factory, what they're going to do is they're going to make these adjustments based off of the length of the jacket. And in qualitative factories, what they'll say is they'll say, "Do you want us to bring or to adjust the entire button placement and hem of the garment, or do you just want us to lengthen or shorten the bottom of the garment itself?" Once you have that understanding, then you'll start to see that the look becomes much more dynamic, right? If you have a more distinctive collar roll, right, then you can bring more breath to the shoulders with a wider collar roll that will meet at the midsection, but will already have enough breath to create a more balanced look. So when we start thinking about these proportions are going to either accentuate or they are going to diminish your overarching look. And this is before we even talk about like you having knock knees or bow legs, you having a slew foot or feet that naturally are going to angle out. I call these the duck feet, right? In those different types of spaces. Those are going to be affecting the way that the seams on your pant are going to be adjusted. And when you have that looking messed up, it looks like your legs are either going apart from away from each other or that they are going in. But a qualitative tailor or a great factory can adjust for these idiosyncrasies, right? These physical differentiators, and you can have a better look. Now, I've also made the mistake of trying to correct those things for myself by pressing my pants that way. I wouldn't recommend it unless you know what you're doing because it can be a very frustrating process to try to get that squared away. And you may find that one leg does something slightly different than the other. And so it's important for us to understand these different dynamics as we start to really cultivate an awareness of how this actually helps us present ourselves. Just understanding our body, you start to realize that you don't necessarily need to do a lot or to get a lot in order to look your best. So a lot of guys will go out and buy numerous items, cheap items as well, and they don't realize that if they would just consolidate a lot of that spending towards tailoring on qualitative garments, that their stuff would look 10 times better. This is why I'm an advocate of you making investments in clothing. I'm not saying they have to be very high level, significant investments in the range of thousands of dollars, but it's probably more beneficial for you to hop on a secondary website and find a qualitative item at a discounted rate and invest your time on that side into getting something that's going to be beneficial to you over you going to a fast fashion store, going to H&M, going to Zara, going to Forever 21. They sell further stuff, which still feels weird, right? When you could have gone online and found something, or you could have gone to even a space like Soup Supply, Penny Parma, and gotten something that is more qualitative than any of that cheap shit that you were thinking about getting there. So once you start to understand your body, you understand your proportions, you understand your shoulder to hip ratio, you understand where your natural waist is, you understand how your legs actually um, are structured, so how your stance is. You start to understand how your shoulders pitch, how your midsection sits. You start to realize that there are all of these different systems that are working together to create your individual presence. And sometimes it's not even about concealing those things, it's just about being aware of them. You tend to stand different. Your posture changes once you're aware that you're slouching a little too much. You start to realize that you want to put your shoulders back if they're pitching a little bit forward, even before you make any changes to your wardrobe. And once you start making those changes to your wardrobe, you'll notice that when you start to lean forward with your posture and you've already made the adjustments with your clothing, it will force you to readjust because otherwise the garment is going to look off and it's not going to be comfortable because everything that you've adjusted has been for the best version of you. Now, this is also why I tell a lot of guys when we're fitting them, they'll will start fitting and they'll be like, and I'm like, is this how you're gonna stand? And they're like, what do you mean? Is this what your posture is gonna be when I make this garment for you? Because if I make it and you're standing like this, and then you relax back into your normal posture, this is going to be off, right? And so then they relax. And this is why we'll also take if especially if it's a new client, I may take two measurements. I may take a measurement where they are here, and then we'll talk, and they'll start to relax, and then I take another measurement to get their true proportion and their true posture, so I know what I am actually working with. So it's just an understanding of these things, and when you start having this, you'll start to communicate confidence, even if you're not going to be at the pinnacle of the presentation that you want to have. Um, World Park says fast fashion is really isn't for men when we hit the late 20s. I would tell you and argue that it's not for you in your early 20s to create the best habits. Why not start early, right? And again, if you don't have a lot of money, it doesn't mean that you don't have a lot of resources that you can leverage for quality pieces. I had a bad habit of early on getting some cheap stuff for like my first year. And then after that, because I had the awareness to hop on eBay, my mentor told me about eBay. Like I started finding great pieces at a fraction of what everybody else was paying. So just because you don't have the money doesn't mean that you don't have the time and the resources to do the research in order to find some stuff that really works for you. So once you start having this awareness, but great comment, Will Parks, appreciate it. Once you start having this awareness, it communicates very different, and you'll start to even pay attention to how you walk, how you relax, how you talk to individuals when you change your posture, when you're aware of your proportions, when you're aware of the scale of your shoulder line to your hips. All these things are going to affect how you end up showing up. And so it may not seem that important, but if you start to master this, you will be the best dressed man in the room, even if you are not purchasing new goods, because you'll be taking these items to the tailor and having them addressed when you need to. So I want you to try this on to see how it fits you. If you are really looking to cultivate an awareness of your physique and your body, pause, it's not the type of party, no Diddy. Then you can sit with me for 1 hour with a snapshot of your style, and we can go over your proportions, because it's not just about your body, it's about your face, it's about understanding your neck, as well as how all of these different parts of you work together to create a stylistic system, and which colors you should be utilizing for the best representation of yourself, as well as what pieces and silhouettes you should be paying attention to in order to look your best. So if you're interested, you can set up a time with me at info at Style Architects, which will be changing very soon, but right now it'll still be info at Style Architects. You can see the name right there. And we will sit down. It's complimentary, so it won't cost you anything. And if you are still interested, there's some next steps that we can take after that. So once you try this on, see how it fits you. If it fits you well, then make sure that you're paying attention to your proportions and to your silhouette, your scale, and all of these different elements for how they work together so that you can show up as the best version of yourself. And if it doesn't, we're right here in the dressing room. You can leave it right where it is, and we'll address something else next week. If I don't have any other questions, I'm gonna leave you to it. I don't see any other questions, but thank you for the comments and the questions tonight. And again, guys, remember this is always going to be a conversation. If there are no, or if there are questions, if there are rebuttals, you don't agree with what I'm saying, then by all means leave a comment and we can discuss it. If you have questions, or if you don't have questions, I'll always have some stuff to walk you through, to talk you through. But if you have style questions, or you want to develop a understanding of yourself through your style, through your personal development, then we're always happy to have those conversations. We've had some interesting conversations. Probably about 2 months ago, we had a conversation around pity and whether or not it was worth going to. And there's quite a bit of conversation there. So maybe I just need to start having some more controversial um, positions so that we can initiate a conversation. I promise I'm not going to judge you. We listen, but we don't judge. Actually, I judge. Me and my folks judge. We just don't convict. Right? There's no conviction, just judge, just judgment. As I'm sure you're probably judging me. But outside of that, be great today. Um, then again, you already are. You know that you already are. So now all you have to do is show up and show out in style, remembering that dress is nothing more than the expression of a man's state of mind. So you, yes, you should always dress to address your life and your style. Outside of that, we'll see you next week. Peace.